This week on In the Field, we're going to La Jolla for some clouds and some reflections. Welcome back to In the Field. My name is Scott Davenport, and thanks very much for joining me today. Before I get into today's episode, a shameless plug. I've just released a new ebook, and it's really apropos for today's shoot. It's called 10 Tips for Photographing Beautiful Seascapes. And it's a light read, but it takes all the things that I've learned from several years of shooting at the ocean and jams them all into a single book. You can click right here on the screen, jump over to it. It's for $5. You'll have it in your pocket, and the next time you go out for an ocean shoot, you'll have tons of tips that you can follow to come away with some great shots. So with that out of the way, marketing hat is off. Let's get back to talking about this shoot. So I went out to La Jolla, one of my favorite spots, and on this particular Saturday, it was everyone's favorite spot. There were about 20 to 25 photographers out there, all of us with our tripods in a row, and everyone taking various types of shots. Beautiful evening, great cloud cover. And well, let's just get over to the maps. I'll show you where this is, and then we'll look at some footage from the shoot. Here's San Diego downtown, and to the north is my favorite spot, La Jolla, California. Let me zoom into the map here a little bit more, and we'll show you right here in this little green stretch on the map. That's known as Nicholson Point. And on this particular day, the sun was setting more or less due west. And I'll switch over to the satellite view. So downtown San Diego is here. There's the peninsula of La Jolla. Let me zoom into that area. All right. And so here along this area is Nicholson Point. And as I rotate around here, let's get that 3. There we go. That's going to be better. So here are all these different, formations of rocks. And right in this area is one of my real favorite spots. These long fingers reach out at high tide. But let me spin around so you can get the view right from the camera. And zooming in here, I was setting up on this particular rock here, and you can even see the tide pools that you'll see in a moment here from the footage. So I'm set up here, and kind of peering out over this rock. The sun is setting in about this direction. And yeah, let's switch over to the video.
It is a gorgeous afternoon here in La Jolla, if not a little bit noisy. Just getting set up here, waiting another hour or so before the sun's going to dip down to see how much of these clouds are going to hold. The clouds themselves will be there, but the patterns, who knows? They're moving around a lot. Tide's coming in, and in any event, I'm just happy to be here this evening. I've wandered up and down the beach a little bit, and I've settled on a composition I haven't tried before. This area here, it's got these 2 nice tide pools, and they're reflecting the sky just beautifully. I'll show you the image through the camera. And really, at this point, then it's just waiting for the sun to go down. And I'll show you the camera settings here as well. And yeah, now it is primarily the waiting game. I'm going to let this composition play itself out.
So a couple of things stood out for me on this shoot. First was the composition. There's a particular spot on Nicholson Point that I really like. There's these long rocks that reach out into the ocean, and you saw that in the first clip. I shot that many times, but I didn't think that we were going to get that brilliant sunset, and I was right. I didn't get the full-blown color in the sky. So I moved just a couple of rocks over to where these tide pools were to catch some reflections of those clouds in the sky, and get a little play of the sky on the top, a little bit of sky on the bottom, thanks to those tide pools. And I was really happy with how that turned out. The other thing was my camera settings. So you saw a kind of glary photo of what my camera settings were there. And if you could see through the glare, you'll notice that I was bracketing the shots. And the reason I do that is to make sure I nail the exposure. I very rarely do HDR work, and I find that that's actually sometimes difficult with a subject like the ocean because lots of things are moving. but it's really more to make sure that I get a good exposure. And secondly, if you're really paying attention, you'll notice that my ISO was set at 200, and that was really just a mistake. I had played around with something else. I had upped the ISO so I could get a shot of this crevice in a rock that was a little bit dark, and forgot to lower it back down to 100 when I was setting up for my final shots. So it was a mistake, but I think in the end it really didn't matter too much to my final result. And here's the final image that I took away from this shoot. And I sat at this spot for the duration of the sunset, well before the sun got low enough in the sky to start peeking through the clouds, and even well after the sun had gone down. And I chose this particular shot because of that nice starburst effect that the sun gave just as it started to peek from underneath the clouds. When you have your aperture set at f8 and it gets even more pronounced as you go to 11 or 16, you get that those fingers of light from a very small light source. It has to do with the blades of your camera and how it closes the aperture, yada, 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 some technical mumbo jumbo, but you get this really nice effect. And that only happened when the sun was just peeking from behind the cloud. Tip of the week is, well, let me stage this here. I saw lots of other photographers out there, I mentioned that, and a lot of them were running around trying to catch different compositions during that narrow window of sunset. And it's fine to experiment. That's actually a good thing once you've gotten the shot that you went out to get. So I prefer to get on the scene early, scout around a bit, and decide on what I'm going to go for when that moment of golden light arrives. And I think if I were running around and changing up my compositions, I probably would have missed that little starburst that I was able to capture. If you recall from a previous episode of In the Field where I was shooting the Cabrillo National Monument, the lighthouse up there, I got impatient, I changed my composition, and then suddenly the sky lit up and I turned back, and it cost me a lot of work in post. And so I guess the tip is find that composition that you want for that day, get it at the right light, and then go ahead and do experiments. Those experiments might end up being test shots for a future visit. They might end up surprising you and it'd be the best shot of the shoot. You never know. But the rushing around, particularly on slick rocks where you're jumping across crevices, I saw some some interesting activity there. I just don't think that's the best use of your time when you're on the scene. Before I go, one little bit of Q&A. Last week's episode, I showed you some shots from Carlsbad, California, and the one that I processed on the in-post episode, which was a long exposure, I got a question from Joe asking, why did I choose a 3-minute exposure? It seems kind of arbitrary, but the reason was to get the ocean to really smooth out, you need a long exposure. 10, 15 seconds doesn't usually cut it. Like today's shot from this week, that was about maybe 5 to 6 seconds. And you can still see waves and things like that. To get that really smooth water on a water that's really choppy like the ocean, you've got to go very long. So why 3 minutes? There was a fair amount of experimentation. A lot of this has to do with what's your aperture setting? Are you using a filter? If you're cutting down the light with a smaller aperture or a neutral density filter, you're going to need to leave your camera open longer. I started with about a 90-second exposure and took a look at the back of the camera. And how did it look? Did it look good? Did I need to go longer? And then just a little bit of experience comes in with that. So I doubled the exposure, partially because of what I saw on the screen, but also because at that particular time of day, the light was fading very fast. So I knew I would need to compensate for the fact that as the ambient light was decreasing rapidly, keeping that camera open for an extra maybe 20 to 25 seconds to get that smooth, glassy water look. So Joe, thanks for that question. And if you've got a question, please let me know, send it in. I'd love to be able to help you out with your photography. And your questions make me think about my own photography. So, you're helping me as well, and I really appreciate that. That brings us to the end of this week in the field. Thank you again for sticking with me through, I guess it's a little longer of a video this week. And I'll probably be back for some processing of this shot, show you some of the work in the studio that went into it. In the meantime, feel free to hit me up on social media, Follow me on the website, shoot me a message, let me know what you like. Love to hear from you. I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.